Abraham Lincoln, super important guy, arguably our most important president ever. Did you know he was also gay? That is the point of this documentary called Lover of Men, The Untold History of Abraham Lincoln. This is going to piss people off, and I love that. So you guys subscribe and hang out because we love talking about documentaries. And so this is one that we definitely wanted to get to when we heard that it existed in the world. Alonso, please tell us about this movie.
Bedding down with Joshua Speed for 4 years.
There is love between those two men.
When you put together all of the evidence, it's really startling.
So this is a thing that's been happening in scholarship quite a bit lately, where people have talked about the intimate friendships that Abraham Lincoln had with a number of men in his life, most notably Joshua Speed, who he was friends with before getting married to Mary Todd. And the film, aesthetically is kind of a History Channel show. It's a lot of talking heads, some recreations, and some are better than others. A lot of voiceovers with letters and that kind of thing. But, it is positing the, in some circles, controversial notion that Lincoln was, by our modern standards, a gay man whose deepest relationships were with men. He got married because that's what you did at the time, and but really the real love of his life was not Mary Todd Lincoln; it was Joshua Speed. And so, they roll out, I think, a pretty convincing case. They talk to a lot of different historians, and then the film does, I think, a really smart thing, which is it takes the story of Lincoln as one of many examples in which queerness is erased from history. And we see this over and over again. Certainly, I encountered it a lot while writing my book, Hollywood Pride, when we talk about, movie stars and directors and whatnot of yore in Hollywood. But, the Henry James's family suppressed his letters for the better part of a century. We're only recently hearing about Bram Stoker's mad crush on Walt Whitman. There has been a devoted sense in the academic community to either obfuscate this stuff or pressure other people to do so. They give the example here of Carl Sandburg's famous Lincoln biography and how he referred to both Lincoln and Speed as having a streak of lavender, and their soft parts were as soft as May violets or something like that.
What does that mean?
Yeah, and then that got taken out of subsequent editions. And there was a I'm already forgetting the title of it. There was a nature doc that aired on Peacock this year during Pride. And it was about how queerness exists in nature, not just same-sex relationships and sexuality, but transness and all these other kind of things. And that even in science, like biologists and people who study nature and animals have been pressured for centuries to suppress this stuff. And so, I think documentaries like this are important because they are talking about a history that's been occluded, but this is also talking about the larger sense that so much of history has been occluded by people who want to tell you that gay people have never existed, that we're this new weird thing, and that we have never contributed anything to society. And it kind of does a quick tutorial on how homosexuality got pathologized, basically, in science, starting
Kinsey.
way before, like Freud, starting in the late 19th century when the eugenicists were deciding, who were the good humans and who weren't. So anyway, this movie wraps its arms around a lot. I think it does so pretty effectively. It is not visually a feast, but it is a lot of food for thought. And I fear the people who need to see it most will refuse to see it, but I'm glad it's out there.
Right. They go, oh, don't woke my Lincoln.
Yeah.
You know that's going to happen for sure.
Course,
it's just such a threat to their idea of like patriotism and being an American and being a man.
Of history, yeah.
Right. So tall, statuesque, like he couldn't have been
Rail
gay.
splitter.
Manly man. He was born in a log cabin. Come on. So I was fascinated by this from a historical perspective. There's a lot of good context here, as you say, because they explain, in the 19th century, a lot of times men would have their closest relationships with other men. And like maybe the mattress was the most expensive thing in the home. And so you had to share. And it wasn't just about warmth. And there would often be much more intimate contact than that. I learned a term I had not heard before, femoral.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. They're like, oh, that makes sense because they're legs.
Yeah.
So I learned a lot here. But I think they do a good job of being very clear-eyed in using evidence from these letters, many of which I understand have never been seen before, right? And so we have him writing, very intimately to Joshua Speed and talking about how, just like missing him. Like there's an intimacy to the writing that goes beyond just like, hey, pal, how you doing?
And way more intimate than any of his letters to any of the women in his life ever were, apparently.
For sure. And then when, he also, it's interesting historically, he goes to Joshua Speed's family's plantation with him in Kentucky.
Yes.
And this prolonged exposure to what slavery really looks like was extremely influential on him in terms of like what would eventually become the Emancipation Proclamation. Like that was pivotal to him. And he would not have had that experience if he had not been so intimate with Joshua Speed for so long. They talk about how, he could have afforded his own house. He could have afforded his own bed, but for 4 years slept in the same bed with Joshua Speed.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very persuasive.
Yeah,
I think.
No, I think they lay out a case and they talk to a lot of people. It's not like, they got the 4 people and it's their crackpot theory. Like there's a deep bench here of historians and of scholars, people like Jonathan Ed Katz and Michael Bronsky and Thomas Pilsudski. This is directed by Shaun Peterson. And I think they at least make an effort to mix up the talking head interviews, like they're in different rooms, the camera angles are different, that kind of thing. But I'd say formally this is not a particularly challenging film, but in terms of its content is very much so, in terms of the established notion of who we think Lincoln was and what his life was about. And I think more and more this is one aspect of modern day historians having the liberty to be like, actually, we think this because of this, and here's the reasons why and how it lines up. And obviously, the idea of what gay even meant, or what a man who was affectional towards other men meant in the late 19th century is not the same as we see it in the early 21st century. But I think they're very good at establishing what they're talking about, what the context for that was.
Yeah. But the fact that he was more bereft over the death of his bodyguard than he was over the death of one of his own children is, pretty convincing there.
Yeah, who was the first casualty of the Civil War, which I also didn't know.
The reenactments are terrible. They're really cheesy.
They're
really like softcore porn with their like, the elusive glances, elusive aroused glances. And they're always in slow motion, like slow motion canoodling and slow motion, like holding hands and frolicking. They're really repetitive. Like, I don't know, this needed to be an hour and 40-minute long film. I think this could have been like a solid, packed, hour-long documentary. Exactly. I feel like all that stuff, maybe they needed to cover a lot of the letters and they needed to cover a lot of the talking heads input. So they needed to have something visually to put over that, but it's so repetitive and it's so cheesy.
Kind of, yeah. Especially like the actress who plays Mary Todd Lincoln, no shade on this woman, but she just doesn't look like a woman of the 19th century. She looks very like they found her on the campus of USC, the dudes, I don't know if it's the hair or whatever, they tend to look a little more sort of oldie timey, but yeah, I appreciate the fact that they aren't just like Lincoln was gay, boom, and leave it at that. Like they really go through the steps of explaining sort of societal expectations of that era and the larger idea about, historical erasure. So I'm glad they did it, and I think there's a lot here that's valuable and that I hope moves the conversation forward, because it's been going on for a while, but I think they're really kind of putting all the different strands of it in one place in a way that's pretty effective.
Yeah, and we see Lincoln doing a lot of presidential stuff here too in the reenactments. And imagine how much more he could have gotten done with a little boost of caffeine from our friends at Coffee Bros. They have a new roast out, which I'm very excited about. It is called Kenya Pea Berry, and is a light medium roast with candied grapefruit and rosemary and grilled pineapple.
Ooh.
I'm excited to try that one. And we have a deal with them for 20% off on this roast. It's a different code. It's down below. It's like Peaberry, please. And there's like a Z in it. Anyway, I'll spell it out for you down below so you can get it for yourself. But that sounds really, really cool. And, they probably didn't have great coffee back when Lincoln was president.
I'm sure the choices were limited. So yeah, he would have appreciated it.
All right. So what is your number then on Lover of Men?
I want to give this a 7.5. Like, again, the filmmaking isn't the greatest, but I think as an assemblage of ideas, it cannot be ignored.
Yeah, I'm going to say 6. I learned a lot, but it's kind of terrible a lot of the time. But it's very informative.
But not in a scholarly way.
No, it's a great array of very informative historians and scholars. But yeah, it's a little cheesy too. Okay, so Lover of Men is in theaters, I think. So maybe go check it out.